Hi everyone, I'm Stan Mallow. Welcome to Paranormal Yacker. My guest in today's show is David Oman, a well-respected producer, creator, co-writer, and author. I'll be talking with him about his book, Ghost of Cielo Drive, The Afterlife of Sharon Tate, and the Spirits of the Oman House. I'll also be talking with him about the tours he offers at the house, and since he resides there too, I'll definitely be asking him about what life is like for him living in a haunted house. David Oman, welcome to Paranormal Yacker.
Thanks for having me on, Stan. I appreciate it.
One of the most gruesome and notorious murders of our time was committed on August 8th, 1969, when Charles Manson's quote unquote family descended on Roman Polanski's residence on Cielo Drive in Beverly Hills and brutally murdered 5 people, including Polanski's wife, actress Sharon Tate, who was 8.5 months pregnant at the time. What, David, was the first clue, sign, or message you received from the other side that convinced you that the murder victims of the slaughter of so many at the Polanski house, which was not far from your home, were haunting your residence?
From the first time I came up here, I guess my father called me up 25 years ago to come and take a look at the lot. I initially felt just like I was coming back to a place that I'd been years and years earlier as a kid. And what I mean is when I was in high school, we all read Helter Skelter. So we were all intrigued by the story. And luckily enough, we all lived in LA and it was a close enough type of location that we could go visit. We actually came up here about 9 years after the murders took place in 1978 to see the location. And I remember as a kid, we were all going up to the drinking party and such. And my first thought was, I got to bow my head and pay respect to those who died here, because it was such a completely unique situation with the tragedy and the murders that took place there. When I came 1998 to look at the property, it was like, oh my God, I'm here again. And it felt familiar. As far as when did I know that the spirits from the murders were visiting my home? That would be probably about 2004. After 2 years of living here, I had felt that there was serious activity going on. Maybe it has something to do with that location and that murder and the proximity to the murders. Why all of a sudden would they be visiting? But I knew that there was activity going on. I got confirmation in 2004 when, after 2 years of living here, I decided to have a paranormal investigation done here at the house. And we did it on the 35th anniversary of the murders. I brought out Rob Wardowski, who was a famous parapsychologist and an author. He came to the house with his wife, and he brought a psychic over. And the psychic was told nothing about the location or anything. And she came in, her name was Alma Carey. Alma came in the house, sat down at the dining room table. Rob and I was like, oh, we got to go outside and take care of something with Anne, his wife. We went outside for about 10 minutes. When we came in, Alma said, oh, I just saw your girlfriend. I know for a fact that we're the only 4 people in the house. Myself, Rob, his wife Anne, and Alma. I said, what did she look like? And she described this woman, 5'5", 5'6", long blondish brown hair, straight, went down past the back, I guess, came down and then gathered around the middle of her back. As she described her, she saw her walk in from the den, around the bar counter, turned to her left, looked at Alma. Alma and her eyes met. She smiled at Alma. She then turned and started walking towards the staircase and walked down the staircase. Okay, tell me more. Because she acted like she owned the place. She was wearing a white blouse and a short mini skirt, and she said she had very shapely legs, just acted like she lived there. My girlfriend, who is 5'11", 6 foot tall, has chestnut brown hair, straight, and has no interest whatsoever in being here this evening for this event, and she's not here. I looked at Rob and I said, she just described who? So we grabbed a photograph of Sharon. We showed it to Alma, and she goes, "Oh, that's her." But then I said, "That's impossible." So Rob and I went through the entire house. Mind you, there's only two other entrances to this house from the outside, an exit on the second floor and an entrance exit on the third floor. That's it. Both of which were locked from the inside with a deadbolt. We didn't find anybody in the house. So at that point, I knew, since Alma knew nothing of the house and location, and remember, in 2004, Sharon Tate was not that big of a household name as she is now. And obviously because of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So I was like, this is insane. The fact that she saw somebody that physically looked like a real life person that she thought was my girlfriend, didn't appear as an apparition, was the first time in confirmation that we got that Sharon Tate's spirit was visiting here. What's interesting is I actually saw the apparition at Jay Sebring literally about 3 weeks earlier, in the middle of July that same year. And I didn't recognize it as Jay Sebring because he didn't have straight hair. The apparition had kinky hair. And I had only seen photographs of Jay Sebring with his straight hairstyle. And then later found out that he had created hair relaxant for men that had kinky hair because in the 60s, straight hair was the style that was in. And that's how I ended up realizing that I was being visited by the victims of the murders.
Now that you, David, have lived in your home for a number of years, and quite obviously the spirits there are as aware of you as you are of them, I was curious to know the day-to-day interactions, the dynamics that takes place between you and the spirits.
Almost 8 years ago, I ended up installing, at the time, I think it was 16 closed circuit television cameras throughout the house. Because I had brought in different paranormal investigative teams to come in here and investigate. And the time that it took to set up the equipment and tear it down became a little bit of a labor of love, let us just say. It's those times that we're recording when people are here doing their investigation is like maybe 2% of my life. We're right now at 30 cameras throughout the entire house, which started out at 16. I've come to find that my initial thought that, oh, it's just the victims of the Tate murders that are visiting the house. To come to find out that the paranormal activity is far greater by 1,000-fold than just limited to the 5 victims and, of course, Sharon's baby, making it 6 victims from down the street that visit the house. I've had incidents that have taken place and that have left me with the thought that why would somebody that's dead, that's been dead for now 55 years, come 3 months from now, come to visit somebody that is no personal connection to that individual when they were alive? Why would a spirit go out of their way to go reach out across the planes of existence to tap somebody on the shoulder? And what I started to realize was that the spirits that are visiting are well beyond those that we've associated with the connection to the Tate murders. And what I mean is I've had people that have had experiences here that we've recorded, that in one case that in particular, we recorded this man's voice during a seance just on a digital recorder, well, 3 digital recorders and on a video camera that was being operated by a cameraman shooting the seance. During the seance, I was there in the room and I said, stop the seance, to the chagrin of the 2 psychics that were there, Alma Carey and Lily Caron Willis. And I said, you got to stop. And they said, why? I said, because I heard a voice. So we reviewed the first digital recorder. In the silence, you hear this man's voice say, let it go, mija. Played the second recorder. Same voice, same time. Third recorder, same. The guy on the video, on the camcorder, I said, rewind your camcorder back 35 seconds and listen. Sure enough, he recorded the same voice saying, let it go, mija. At the end of the seance, this girl comes up to me and she goes, that was my father. He died 5 years ago from cancer, and I've not been able to go on with my life since he died. The words of endearment that he would call me, he would say me, which in Spanish means loved one. The whole belief system that I have come to know that this is all connected to the victims of the Tate murders, the house has extremely elevated DC EMF levels, which stands for electromagnetic field levels. And what happens is that when people come in the house, every one of us has a group of spirits around us. And when those spirits enter this environment, they're able to manifest much more easily. And what I came to believe was in the scene in the movie Ghost, when the mentor spirit is telling you, you've got to focus all of your energy into one point and then expend that energy to make something, an object move. That in this house, the environment is so conducive to paranormal activity, or in another way to say it, it's so hot that the energy allows the spirits to derive their energy off of what's in the environment here. So where in other locations, they have to focus all of their energy and intensity to make this explosion of energy occur to make an object move. Here, it's like, bing, oh, I can move objects. I can do things. Whereas I said, it's like a spirit's day at the beach when they hit this environment. So that what I've come to have experiences is that people are visiting and stuff happens to them. And I say, who's the first person that popped into your head when you had that initial experience? And they said, my friend or my mom or my grandparents. That's who it was who was reaching out to you from across the dimensions.
The Oman House has been featured on many shows, including Ghost Hunters and Haunted History. Paranormal experts worldwide have visited and dubbed it the Mount Everest of haunted houses because of the paranormal activity that occurs there. Can you tell me about some of that paranormal activity?
As recently as a week and a half ago, I had somebody over to the house to screen my movie. She's a social media influencer from Florida that was in town. I said, why don't you come over? I said, we'll do a little ghost investigation, tour of the house, and I'll screen the movie for you. She was downstairs in the theater, and I had to come upstairs into the office and do some work. And I said, let's see how she's enjoying the movie. Of course, I'm here in my office, and I turned on the cameras to see how she was enjoying the movie. And it was towards the end of the movie, and I saw she was sitting on the edge of the couch watching with bated breath, just like really into it. And I've watched the movie over 100 times since I'd gone through 10 different incarnations of the film. So I'm very familiar with the sound and the different dialogue, etc. Towards the end of the movie, I'm watching the scene, and all of a sudden, I start hearing conversation. So my eyes drift, focus on her. She has headphones on because she has a little difficulty with the hearing. And her mouth is open like this, going, not moving, not saying a word. And I'm thinking, I'm here by myself, except for her in the theater room downstairs. There's no one in the house. There's no TV, no radios, nothing on. And I'm hearing this conversation. I go like this, my eyes popping, going, holy crap. There's this rude spirit talking over the movie, and it's just soundtrack, just score, music score. So I brought her upstairs after she was done. I said, I thought it was great. I really enjoyed it. I said, I want to show you something. So the video camera footage, and I show her, and from both cameras, the one on the wall and the one across from her on the floor, both of them recorded this woman's voice saying, maybe we should hide. And it's as clear as a bell. And it's not like I'm actively looking for any paranormal activity. I'm just eavesdropping, watching her reaction to the movie. And I hear this and I'm like, holy crap. So I showed her and she goes, I didn't hear anything. I didn't hear anybody speaking. And I said, both cameras captured it, and they're about 25 feet apart from one another. It was just amazing. So that's an example. A week earlier, I was going into that room on the third floor, and I was doing some cleaning. And I went into the guest bedroom to make sure everything was fine. I left the room. I go back down a couple of hours later, and I go to the guest bedroom door, and I go to open it, and it's locked. Now, all the locks that are not key locks in the house are the bedroom, the privacy locks. On the doorknob, you have to push the button in and rotate it a quarter turn. So it's not like it just, you press the button in and that's what locks it. You have to literally physically turn it. So I go to the doorknob and I'm saying, who locked the door with that? And as I'm saying this, I was like, look at this. The sofa recliner next to me, the leg rest, starts going up on its own. Mind you, there's a cushion armrest that sits out 3 inches from the bottom, the side of the sofa chair, where the button is, where you have to push in the button to make the thing go up. I took a step back and didn't even realize, and I looked down, I noticed that the leg rest is up. I'm like, holy crap, how did that go on? What did that? And I came in, the thing was down with it. And you watch the video and you watch me go from an absolute, not terrified, but a pretty like scared moment to cracking up about it, saying, all right, spirits, I got it. That's you. And it's just happenstance. I mean, after 22 years of living here and having the faucets turn on by themselves in the bathroom in front of me, and seeing an apparition of Jay Sebring, as I said 20 years ago, and having objects get knocked over on them their own, and having large Pyrex casseroles dropped inside the kitchen, inside the Lazy Susan in the cabinet on their own, and not finding out that the source of the crash and explosion that I heard of glass was from, in fact, the Pyrex casseroles being lifted up on the back of the Lazy Susan and then moved over 6 inches and then dropped 22 inches straight down on the ground. The stuff that happens is always curious and it's interesting and it's fascinating, but I never find it threatening. I find it almost as if they're like saying, well, we're here. Hi, we're with you. And I was like, all right, next time you want to go do that, don't break 3 Pyrex casseroles that I need to cook with, because that's not appreciated. Not like I could actually have any effect upon them outside of just, how should I say, requesting a little leave it alone type of thing. Like, let's not do that. If you want to do things, I got it. You want to let me know you're here, that's fine. But for instance, when the faucets turned on, I was like, oh my God, thank you for letting me know you're here. And then I thought about it, it's like, wait a second. If I'm not here and you turn the faucets on and I don't find it, say you're on the 3rd level bathroom, the faucets turn on and I don't find it for a few days because I'm not really going down there, that could cost a lot of money, I'm thinking in my head. It's like something, spirits, I appreciate you doing this in front of me and I so appreciate it. But by the way, can we lay off the water gags? We really can't waste water like this. And if in fact this happens under circumstances that I'm not aware of, and if I find out it could cost me an arm and a leg, I appreciate it. Can we find some other gags? And people go, that was your response? Well, yeah, I mean, I want to acknowledge their efforts and their energies to do this, and I appreciate it, but look, this isn't the smartest thing in the world because it could get expensive financially and we're wasting water. Let's be conscious of what we're doing without making it a burden on top of a freaky moment. And people go, you're so amenable to it. It's like, it's never in any way, shape, or form has it ever felt like it was a threat. Like, oh my God, they're after me. And that's why I realized that a lot of people experience paranormal activity and take it to heart and misconstrue the incident and interpret it in a very, very negative light. And I go, a lot of what we perceive is of a threat is because we've been taught and told for so many years that religiosity or whatever the source is, that it's bad. But that's casting it all into a negative light. And I think that people's response towards paranormal occurrences has been tainted in a way that things happen. And it was like, spirits like going, hi, honey. Oh my God, it's a ghost. Oh my God, it's a ghost. And the ghost is like going, all right, maybe you're not mature enough in the state of your life where I can come and visit you. And my presence here is freaking you out. I think I'd rather disappear forever than to have you go through that meltdown and experience that much fear of my appearance. So I'm gone. The same thing with poltergeist. It's a poltergeist. I got news for you. After 22 years of living here and seeing objects get knocked over and seeing an object go from the fish tank across the den 10 feet and land in front of somebody, that's not poltergeist activity. That we've come to a point where an innocuous moment for the paranormal occurrence turns into poltergeist activity. It's quote unquote, it's poltergeist. And I go, you have no freaking clue what a poltergeist is. If it's an incident where they throw a rock, it's like, oh my God, it's a poltergeist. That's because I feel like you didn't listen or acknowledge the first step, the second step, the third attempt for the spirits to communicate with you. So it's almost like it's going up a staircase, up a ladder. You didn't listen to us the first time, so we had to go a little bit higher up on the ladder. We had to go up the next. So finally, you acknowledged that we were here because you dismissed all of the previous occurrences as the house is settling. Oh, must be the neighbor and all this stuff. And I say, you guys are just basically missing these signs, so that by the time you have the rock thrown, then it's like, oh my God. It's like, but you missed the prior incidents. And then I say, but a real poltergeist activity, which poltergeist is German, means noisy ghost, is a lot more dramatic than anything that most people have ever experienced. And that's why the rarity of a poltergeist occurrence is so rare. And yet everything is a poltergeist. It's just a ghost living there. They're not a poltergeist. Poltergeist is like a reference to people. It's like when you want to talk about poltergeist activity, reference the original Steven Spielberg movie Poltergeist and the scene where they open the door to Carol Ann's room and there's a tornado of objects swirling around in a room in such a mass hysterical way. It's like, oh my God, that's a poltergeist. The figurine got knocked out. It's a poltergeist. It's just the spirit saying, hi, we're here. We're here. So that's my personal belief of what the paranormal realm is really like versus what we're told, shown, and taught on television shows that are made for dramatic purposes. As they say, the disclaimer, this is for entertainment purposes only. Take it for what it is. Just like a theatrical seance is not a real life seance. Stuff is going to happen because it's a theatrical seance. It's not a real life testimonial to the paranormal. So hope that answered your question.
Now, earlier in the interview, you spoke about seances at the Oman house. I was curious to know if, by any chance, at one of those seances, did one of the deceased from the massacre at the Blansky house get related to you or to somebody else, one of the other attendees at the seance, messages that they wanted to relate to one of their loved ones who are still on the earth plane?
Years ago, when we did the seances with Alma Carey and stuff, she has passed away 2 years ago now. She would relate to us that she was in communication with the spirits and that they were not reliving their nightmarish demise at their end of their life, that they were quite happy and to be where they are. They're accepting of the situation. They were not exactly appreciative of how people were, I should say, bringing great deal of attention to the murders, and they were disparaged as nothing more than footnotes to this terrible tragedy.
You, David, offer tours of the Oman house to the general public and also open it up to paranormal enthusiasts and investigators of the supernatural. What can you tell me about your tours?
Well, honestly, the tours, we haven't done any, we've done a few of them since COVID ended, which is like a couple of years now. But for the most part, we haven't done a lot of them. I've contracted through different companies, tour companies, to come here to the house and stuff. But we really pulled back due to COVID, obviously. But they were just basically the tour of the house. We'd have a couple of investigators that were here to help go take the people through the house with equipment and to bridge the gap from the novice to the experts that have been here. We had done the seances with the psychics and stuff. And of course, with the cameras, like I've told people, the benefit of coming when they had to have those events here, I said the benefit is that you don't have to have equipment, because I say your body is your best piece of equipment. What you hear, see, and feel are important. And I said, what's unique is when you're walking around the house, most locations do not have cameras set up throughout the entire location. So I said, your best bet is have a pencil and a pad of paper. So if you have an experience, you hear something, you see something, write down the time it took place, write down the room you're in and what you heard or experienced, and then come back and we'll review the footage. And that was what was so wonderful is we were able to literally find stuff that they had experienced. And sure enough, the evidence was there for all to see and hear or watch. But like I said, we haven't done many of those. I think we've done 2 this year through two different companies. And that's been about it. And of course, August, was it 3 months from today or yesterday, is the 55th anniversary of the murders. So we'll see what happens. Like I said, I play it by ear. I'm right now working on a 4-part doc series with a company to see about doing that, because I've become so tired and bored of the TV shows that are all about, well, let's go paranormal investigating. The camera's facing their face, and yet what they're watching, the evidence is to hell in a handbasket. It's all focused on them. I don't want to see somebody react to something. I want to see what they're reacting to. And that's why I think that these shows are so boring and tired and just nonsensical, to the point where I've been on enough of them. And I said, but that's not really relating the truth. They compressed time so that 5 years worth of incidents that have taken place here are shown on the TV in the show as if taken place in the first 2 weeks of me living here. And I've said to people, or they said to me, saying, how could you stand living in that location with a lot of activity? Because what you saw in that episode took place over a course of 5 years, not the first 2 weeks I lived in the house. If I lived in the house and all that stuff happened in the first 2 weeks, I don't know if I could still be living here if all that took place in the first 2 weeks, because there would have been so intense upon intense upon intense in such a short time period. But when you think about it, that all those incidents you saw in that episode had taken place over a 5-year period, how would you feel about it? And then they said, you're right. If it took place over a 5-year period and all those incidents, those 10 incidents, I don't think it would be as bothersome to me to say exactly, because it happens. And then 6 months later, something else happens. And by the time lapse of point A to point B, that 6 month space, it's not as haunting. You get time to work it through your brain and to figure it out and understand it, to the point where it's like, it happens. What am I going to do? And you come to a place where you've accepted it. That's my attitude of living with the paranormal. It's like, who cares what happens? It's better than having rats or having raccoons in your attic and stuff like that, because those are things that can really harm you in the physical sense. Me, spirits, we're all going to become one at some point. Who cares? Is my attitude.
Attitude is everything. Should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to buy your book, or perhaps be on a list to find out about your tours, because you said you're not doing them now, but perhaps they could get their information to you about them so you could inform them of it when you do that? And also, how can they view your movie, House at the End of the Drive? It's Where They Died, which was filmed on location at the Oman house and is considered by many, many people to be one of the best horror movies ever made. How can they do that?
The movie's sitting on Vimeo, and you can go to houseattheendofthedrive.com.vhx.tv, and you can see it there. You can rent it for 3 days. And as far as the book, Ghosts of Cielo Drive, touches onto the Tate murders and the experiences that have been reported here in the first 15 years of me living here. That they can go to ghostsofcielodrive.com. You can get it there. I have self-publishing and self-selling it. What I'm working on now is getting the volume 2 up for people to enjoy and read.
And I definitely look forward to interviewing you about that one. David Oman, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. Yakking with you has been a fascinating experience, and I very much appreciate you sharing with me and my viewers the supernatural side of the Oman house.
Stan, thank you for having me on.
Thank you. This has been great. And again, 1,000 times, thank you. Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. So that you don't miss any upcoming shows, be sure to subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, just press the subscribe button on your screen.